Please listen carefully.
Hi, I'm Paul Frields.
And I'm Dave Guzman.
And welcome to Practical Bass, where we cover a new topic every week in our podcast to help you elevate your gigs and gear and take your bass performances and your musicianship and your mastery of your equipment to the next level. You can find us on the web, of course, at practicalbass.com. If you haven't been by the website, please stop by. You can find all of our episodes archived there. A new one comes out every week. And if you haven't found us on social media yet, look for Practical Bass on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on Google+. And we do want you to connect with us. So please come by and say howdy. You can also leave feedback on the website, and we encourage you to do that. We really want to hear from you. We want to connect with you, the audience, and we want to know what you want to hear. Dave and I have some ideas, and we're going to be running through those over the coming weeks, but we'd really like to hear from you as to what you would like us to talk about as well. And any questions that you have that we can answer, we would love to delve into that. So speaking of which, Dave, what are we going to delve into this week?
Paul, today we are going to talk about efficiencies and some of our experiences around learning new songs.
That was very professional, the way you delivered on that segue. I set you up and you knocked it down.
Well, I rotated it in my head about 15 times. I was practicing and I learned that line.
It's just like directly relevant to our topic matter. It's amazing. Like we start delivering from minute one on this podcast. Just from the very get-go, you know that you're in the hands of professionals.
Yes.
Yeah, so learning new songs, I mean, this is something that every player is going to run into, almost immediately, right? In what you're doing. You can spend a while taking lessons and learning, but eventually you're out there playing with people. And I would guess that most of our audience is probably doing this already, has been doing so for a number of years. If you're not, we certainly recommend it. Playing with other people is absolutely the best experience that you can get as a bass player, right?
It's true. Yeah, that's it. It changes everything at that point.
It really does, because you bring the dynamic of other people and how they play, and you start having, this interpersonal relationship that the music becomes a part of, like a conversation. But when you're doing that, right, in the same way that we pick a topic for each of these podcasts, right, and that enables us to have a conversation, as a group or as a band, you have to pick some music that you're going to go after, right? And in some cases, once you are more experienced, you may be in the position where somebody drops, a pretty big boatload of songs on you, right? And what do you do in that kind of situation? Have you ever run into that, Dave, where you've had like someone who has enlisted you for a gig, whether it was permanent or just a fill-in, and you have this like massive amount of material that you have to learn? Where do you start?
Yeah, so it has happened, and it actually happens more often than I thought it would. It's specifically, I guess, like when you're in sort of this sub role. So if you're building your reputation amongst a circle of musicians and they want to plug you in, and maybe you're just playing one gig, or maybe you're playing a few gigs just with this band, or sometimes it's just that you're joining a band. So for me, the band that I'm in right now, it was a pretty big song drop. I mean, it was 50 songs that I had to learn pretty quickly. And just to kind of like give you some background as to how I went about that, I would say 5 years before that point was really when I developed this skill, or just started developing it, really, like just understanding what needed to be done with that level of urgency. So I had been in a salsa band, and it was a ground up project. So in the beginning, for the first year or so, it was very basic, and it was really about, doing covers, salsa covers, but they were old school, and it was more about the feel and getting an understanding of what that was like.
Right.
But then we started, as a band, we started covering some more complex songs that included a lot of breaks, a lot of changes. The bass work got really tricky.
Right.
Almost orchestrated to some extent. And that was a time where I realized, like, I was struggling. It was taking me a long time to learn these songs.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did is I have a mentor of mine that I've used, a good friend of mine, a mentor from day one, and he recommended to me at that time. I called him and I just asked him, like, what should I do here? And just really casually, he just said, just go to seventh string transcribe.
Mm-hmm.
So I go online, I check it out, downloaded it.
This is like an app that you can run on your iPad or whatnot.
Yeah. At the time, this is desktop time. So, but yes. And so basically, what it allows you to do is, you could throw your song up there and then you could manipulate it. There's a lot of programs like that right now. But this one, what was really nice about it specifically is that it just had those kind of sexy algorithms, if we can ever put those two together. Just it gives you good control around the quality of the sound, so you can bump out the bass,
right,
and most importantly, you can slow it down and still hear the song. It doesn't sound like over the top digital.
Right. So like within reason, you can get it to a tempo that you can work with, but it stays in the same key.
Yeah.
Right? Like kind of fills in the sound that way.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's nice about that is that I just got a process down in basically every song, and I still do this to this day. And what I do is I'll learn the song at like between 60 to 75% of speed.
Right.
Nice and slow. If there's some really tricky work, I can drill it down to 50%.
Mm-hmm.
It gets pretty digital there, but
right. I mean, there's a level at which those algorithms, no matter how sexy they are, they just, the curves don't work.
Yeah. Abort ship. So I'll spend, say whatever amount of time. I mean, it might be like 10, 15 minutes in that speed zone.
Right.
Then I force myself to go at 125%.
Wow. So you shifted into overdrive and you're like, okay, you thought you were cool before. Click. Yeah.
Exactly. And you're burning and your fingers are on fire. And then once I kind of get that, like I don't work so hard to get it to nail it at that speed. But then if I get close enough at that speed, then I just dial it back right to its regular speed of 100%. And it's like butter.
And it seems easy at that point because you're like, oh, well, I could almost do this at 120. So now at 100% speed, it feels like no task at all.
Exactly. So what you asked is if I had if I did have a specific experience where I've been dropped those songs, and so to put that to the test with this band that I'm in right now, it was basically 50 songs, 2 weeks, and it was something I could do, and I never thought I could.
Right. So that the tool, in other words, kind of gave you the power over the process of learning that sort of cemented everything in your head. So I mean, I'm assuming that you probably felt confident after that point. You're like, hey, I've done these things at a faster speed. I'm going back to 100%. These songs feel fine there. And all that while you're kind of cementing the song in your head, like the form and so forth.
Exactly. And in that case, of course, and I'm using charts to just take notes because I can't memorize it in that period of time. So some shorthand kind of charting, whatnot. But, that's been my experience, and I still use that to, today.
Yeah.
So how about you? What are your experiences?
Well, so typically when I'm learning songs, well, nowadays, right, I've got a couple steady gigs that are more the type where we learn 8 to 10 songs for the next couple weeks. And that's a little bit easier to chew on, right? You can kind of take your time and do what you need to for that.
But it's still a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it can be. Yeah, it depends on the complexity of the song. One of the bands is more of like an uptown sort of R&B sound, and you find some amazing bass parts in some of those songs, and they're not always straightforward, or they're not always quite what you expect. So having some time available to work on those really helps.
Right.
But I've also run into the issue of having to learn a lot of songs in a short time. There was an instance, not too distant in the past, where I was subbing in at a winery gig for a band that a friend of mine was in, and he had recommended me for it. So of course I wanted to come in and knock it out of the park, right? Because, when you know that your reputation is built on being able to do things like that, right? People will recommend you then based on that.
It means a lot.
Yeah. So I said it was not too distant in the past, but it was in the days when, smartphones were not nearly as smart as they are now. And, the idea of having like a tablet computer was a pipe dream.
Right.
For those, I really did just chart things out to paper. So, I got a list of songs, and some of them I knew there were a few standard covers, but the vast majority of the list was originals by this band.
Right.
That was actually kind of a curveball, because a lot of the songs that were written by the songwriter in this band were very similar in the chord structures, the chord changes, and there may have been a subtly different feel based on what the band was doing, but it was very easy, if you weren't careful, to slip from one song into another, right? And I'm sure to the writer, right, these all were very different. Like they occupied a very different space in her head.
Sure.
But as a bass player, when I'm playing, E to A to D, right, or something like that, and I'm doing that in 2 or 3 songs, if I can't anchor that on something, right, whether it's a really different groove or really different words or something that helps me differentiate the songs, that can be really difficult. So, I actually had charted all these things out to paper just to make sure I was going to be ready and not, taken by surprise by these songs. And so, I gathered everything to paper, arranged them alphabetically so it would be easy to get from one to the other for the purposes of the show.
Right.
But nowadays, the tools that I have for that are so much easier, right? Like recently I did a wedding gig on short notice, and it was a jazz gig, which actually is fantastic, right? Because I didn't have to go pull down like 40 or 50, MP3s of really modern stuff.
Right.
This was actually doing jazz standards in a little trio.
Yeah.
And that was actually fantastic. The great thing was I could tote with me, my tablet computer. I don't have a really large tablet. It's a little Samsung 7-inch. I'm actually holding it right now in the studio. I use it for, referring to notes while we're doing the podcast. And, I might get a bigger one in the future, but it works great right now. And I've got an app on it that was recommended to me called iGigBook. And it was recommended to me by a great guitar player around here by the name of Bruce Middle. He lives in our town. He recommended this tool to me because you can load real books into it, right?
Excellent.
The ones that you can find all around the web. I won't go too far into that because I know there are all sorts of hairy legal issues involved in that. But if you have those real books in electronic form, you can load them into iGigBook, and it basically indexes everything for you. The app itself only has the indexes. So then you provide the content as a user of the app, and then everything just comes up magically. So, if Bruce tells me, hey, we're going to do Autumn Leaves out of volume 1, I literally just hit a couple things on the tablet, like hit the real book, volume 1.
Wow.
Tap on Autumn Leaves.
What a difference from the days where I would have that, like the real book and the fake book with that plastic binder.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's like just bent and mangled and
right.
flipping through the pages.
After like hundreds of gigs, you're like, when is this thing's going to fall apart on me one day in the middle of a gig?
Yeah. And like you forget that the title starts with A, like A something versus just the name.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So so that's a great tool that I've used. And there's another one that I've used called iReal Pro. iReal Pro, IREAL. And that is another one of these apps that carries a lot of standards that have been transcribed by the provider or by users or whatever. It's like, it's just charts, basically, just simple chord charts. And that also has this facility where you can transpose the key. So if somebody tells it, oh, we're doing that in
cow.
A flat, you know, you can tell it we're going to do this song in A flat, and it'll just automatically adjust the entire chart for you.
Yeah, but what's great about that too is like as you're gigging, especially if you're gigging with a lot of vocalists and they're doing covers, you'll find that, you know, they just have a comfort range, and some vocalists are just adamant about changing every key. Now that's a whole nother topic and, you know, comfort level.
Yeah, for sure.
But to have that ability, because if not, like I need to use something like that, because for me, you know, I use something that's, it's called Fourscore, and all I'm doing is I'm doing all the work with the, you know, I'm charting everything out, and it's just a tool to be able to utilize Dropbox with my iPad.
Right. Exactly.
There's no functionality to it.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. So, I mean, the tools nowadays are just amazing. I mean, I think I paid maybe a total of $15 or something for those 2 apps that I use, and they were so worth it. Just even for the duration of one gig, you know, what is your peace of mind worth for following along with somebody's chart? I mean, it's inestimable value. So that seemed like a great investment, and it's paid off many times since.
Yeah.
So I really like those. Yeah. So another factor in this is figuring out what element of the songs are the most important for you to capture as you're learning. I mean, do you have like one dimension of the whole total sum of a song, right? The groove, particular licks, the feel, like whatever those things are. Do you have like a particular factor that's more important to you in learning songs than others?
Yeah, it's a good question, because you start to prioritize like really what's critical, because every aspect of it really is important, and there are multiple pieces. But for me, I think it's especially when you're covering songs, it's being able to convince the listeners that this is the song, like this is the feel of it. So what that comes down to, I think, is really, you know, not just learning the song, but the crucial point for me is learning those characteristics of those kind of tiny little riffs that give it character, and not just doing the riff, not just knowing those notes, but doing them in that feel. And once I capture that, I feel like the rest of the song unfolds.
Right. Like it kind of falls together, because a lot of times those riffs sort of embody something about the song itself.
Right.
And when you have that anchor, it's almost like a mnemonic device, and it can bring you back to, oh, I remember the rest of the song because this lick leads here, and then that leads here. And so, you know, it sounds like you kind of hook your learning on that riff, and then that kind of leads you through.
Exactly. Yeah. And, you know, and for that, the cool thing is that you just have to kind of be disciplined in knowing what that part is, and it's just looping until, and you've seen them in these instructional videos, and they just have you do it again and again and again and again until it's just smooth and butter.
Right. That probably means also, though, when you're trying to capture a riff like that, you're also trying to, you know, ape a sound, or like sound like that song itself. I mean, I think we're also making an assumption, right? Which is that the group that you're in, or the gig that you're doing, that the aim of that is to capture the original artist performance in a sense, right?
Right.
As opposed to, you know, taking it way out into left field where, okay, then it's more about, all right, you know what the basic changes of the song are, and then you're applying that to a completely different style or a completely different type of performance, because that's what your group is intending to do.
Right. The purpose in that point with those cover bands really is to take the listener back to that time or in that place, and give them that sense of nostalgia, and let them relive that in that moment, and take them to that dream space.
Yeah. I mean, I think from my perspective, the way that I tend to learn songs is, you know, I really look at the structure of the song and the chords of the song, And that's where I start, right? I start by thinking, oh, okay, we're kind of going from the 1 to the 6 minor to the 4 to the 5.
Right.
And I tend to think in the number system whenever possible. It's not always possible. And I know there are songs in my head that I'm either, my knowledge of them is based on strictly on notes or strictly on hand positions or things like that.
Right.
But nowadays, more than ever, I think I've started to really base my experience or base my memory of a song on the number system. And that way, you know, when I'm in a band that's doing, oh, they're playing a half step down and I've walked in with my standard tuning bass, you know, or whatever, or, you know, suddenly they want to change the key down because the singer's voice is killing him that night. It's really easy to change up.
Right.
But I still feel that the key component is knowing the character of the song and how you're trying to deliver it, right? Whether that's the original way that it was recorded or whether it's a, you know, kind of a takeoff on that or the band's own style.
Sure.
You know, applying the song structure to that for me is always, that's kind of how I approach it.
Right.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the little riffs that you talk about really do make a difference. And the funny thing is you can almost play with those a little bit. If you're in one of the groups that is doing a cover, but it's doing really its own take on it, you can kind of play with those little riffs a bit, you know, maybe not apply them verbatim, but, you know, kind of mold them into what you're doing. And again, it kind of leads you through the song structure and helps you remember it a bit. Are there tools that you use to kind of capture that song in your brain and, you know, make sure it sinks in? I mean, is there anything that you use online or whatever?
Yeah, I think predominantly, you know, it's just, if it's a style, if it's a band, or, you know, if it's a genre, just getting into it. If you've got a gig that's coming up, you know, I'm just gonna have that in my playlist regularly. It's gonna be in my car. It's going to be on my computer. Everywhere that I'm at, it's just going to be there and around me. So I can start to kind of feel like what that essence of that bass style is.
To just have it just like sink into your consciousness, basically.
Exactly. And so I'm like passively kind of learning that. And also I think, like, you know, just good old YouTube and just watching people play in different, maybe just in different hand positionings and just seeing how other people are approaching it.
Right. And you can sometimes pick the best of the bunch, right? Like I see a lot of, I'll see a lot of YouTube videos for maybe a specific song where, you know, you've got half the folks are playing it in one position and, you know, maybe somebody else is playing in a different position. And I tend to use those to decide where I'm going to go back to capture some of those lines, right? Because for me, being able to switch keys at will or on demand is really important.
Yeah.
And so I tend to look for the YouTube videos where somebody is capturing that in a closed position, right? Where you're not using open strings.
Right.
Because the more bound up I get on open strings, as you know, as an older player, as a more experienced player nowadays, the more I can get away from using those open strings, the more flexible I find my playing is, right? It's much easier to change the key of the song because I'm really just adjusting up or down the neck as opposed to, oh my goodness, I've got to figure out an entirely new way of playing this because now I'm not using these open strings as a crutch.
Yeah, right? Because once you change from open strings to a closed pattern, the pattern changes, the shape, you know, how we visualize that shape on the neck completely changes.
Yeah. And it is worth pointing out here, right, that it's a little bit easier for us to talk about that as primarily electric players. Whereas, you know, when I play upright, and I know other upright players, this is a major consideration, right? Is that you're using open strings is a way to keep your tonal center in your head on, like, right on the money. And so I'm not saying that using open strings is necessarily bad in every case. It's just from a fingering standpoint on the electric bass, for me, developing and learning the song in a closed position helps me a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that's also why I tend to the 5-string bass, right? Because having slightly smaller hands means I can play, that same note if I'm playing like a low E, right? Instead of playing that low E on the open low E string,
right?
I'm actually playing it on the 5th fret of the low B string,
right?
Because that means that I can use that closed position and also, the reaches from fret to fret are a little bit easier on my hands.
Right.
Yeah. So that's kind of my little secret weapon for the fifth, for that 5th string. I don't think it's not that secret, right? I think everyone knows that, but that's for me, that's my crutch, right? Because, because I don't have really long fingers. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess one other aspect to learning songs that we haven't talked about is, what inspires you to learn new songs other than on demand, right? If somebody walks up to you for a gig and says, I need you to learn these, 50 songs for this gig, next week or whatever. Obviously that is that's your imperative,
right?
But what makes you sit down and just learn new songs for fun on your own?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think in my experience, in my learning process, in my practice, my routines, I use it a lot. And for me, the motivating factor, like what gets me learning a new song that is not specifically charted out for a band or that I may never play live or play for anybody else,
right,
is really because I want to learn it. Like, I want to learn that style. I may not play many like dub reggae gigs, but I want to know, like, what is that?
Right. Like, it helps you learn the idioms of that type of music so you can incorporate it in your playing.
Right. And that adds to like the flexibility and people, I think I started getting a lot of feedback at some point in my bass career where musicians would say, yeah, there's just something about your music. Like, there's like a hop to it or something they would call it. And these are musicians with like a lack of term for what I was doing.
Right.
And when I dissected it, I just realized that it was just because there were so many different styles that I played in that came out in everything that I'm doing.
Right. Right. Just as a whole musician, it's almost like the accent in your dialect. Right. That's your personal signature that you bring to your playing.
Yeah. And I'm addicted to developing that. So that's like my motive.
Yeah. You're the amalgam of everything you've heard and everything you've processed, but then that's all filtered through your own personality and your own experience. And that's what makes you the player you are, makes me the player I am, makes, somebody down the street the player that he is.
Exactly. So, Paul, why do you learn new songs?
Usually just inspired by the greatness of a song. I know there are people who are motivated by hearing great players. I come at it from a little different perspective, which is I love great songs. Like, the thing that inspires me to learn new songs is typically the elegance of a well-written song. They're usually vocal oriented, so they're not just a great musical performance, but rather something that's communicating an idea. That's usually what sets me off. So
interesting.
Yeah. Like, if I hear Amy Mann just released something new, right? If a new song comes out by her, or, I hear a new Elvis Costello tune, or, a really odd album that I got super into as a bass player was the album called Painted for Memory that Elvis Costello and Burt Bacharach did together, which is absolutely hands down one of the most amazing songwriter albums I think I've heard in 2 decades, right? Still one of my favorites. And it's not an album that you kind of launch into as the kind of album you need to learn because you're going to be playing those covers all the time everywhere, right? It's not like going out and getting the latest Justin Timberlake or or something like that, or, learning Kings of Leon's new hit or something like that.
Right.
But as a songwriter fan, that really motivated me to try playing differently, right? It makes me, when I listen to it, I'm trying to play differently, right? I'm usually not playing upright, but I'm trying to like play in a sensitive, more classical or, traditional upright style on the electric bass.
Yeah.
And to have a sense of like softness and elegance in place of being able to play, Arco style with a bow.
Right.
Right. I'm trying to play that way on the electric.
Yep.
And so processing things like that has really influenced me. But, at the same time,
Yeah.
I'll also go out and learn, any new song that I hear where I'm just like, holy moly, this song is amazing.
Yeah.
Like an example, before we started this podcast, right, at the time of recording this, John Mayer just released his Wave 2 for The Search for Everything, and 4 absolutely great songs on it. Hearing those songs, right, just, the writing of the songs,
Yep.
which I think is really becoming his signature more than, being a guitar slinger.
Right.
That really has my engine revved up to learn those songs. And of course, Pino Palladino is on at least one of them.
Right,
And so the
right.
first thing I want to do is, figure out what he's doing and, try to ape it.
See, I just think I don't think I've ever thought of it that way, and it's super cool because you're gearing your bass playing and you're trying to polish your style around just good songs.
Yeah.
Right? Not necessarily. There's great bassists out there, and I know I'm super guilty of like honing in on one bassist who's just technically amazing, and I just want to get right inside of their mind.
Yeah. And there's so many of them too that are so great. And I love listening to them.
Yeah. But they're not on the radio. It's not what like your average listener hears. And when you're in bands, you're out, especially if you're playing these cover bands or whatever band that you're really in, whatever project you're gigging with, it's the purpose is to connect with your listeners.
Right.
And to be able to like, instead of getting in the mind of something so technical, but also like widen your array of skill set so that you can connect with the listener at that level is just, it's great.
Right. I mean, my hope is that some of these songs are interesting at some point down the line to play for, people live.
Sure.
And not everything's going to fit into that context, obviously, right? And I'll woodshed on some, fun songs that I know are never going to be played by me in a band setting.
Right.
Because they're just fun to rock out to.
Right.
But I think a lot of times I will tend to pull together a playlist of, things that are new and contemporary, like the latest, whatever the latest Billboard charts are for, might be top 40, some of it, which, I know that's a lot of electronic dance music inspired stuff. And a lot of the bass that you hear there isn't real electric bass.
Right.
But at the same time, those things are really popular, and kind of understanding how to fit a groove into that context can give you another weapon in your arsenal for playing with other people. And I'll do the same thing for like whatever AOR is now, right? Album oriented rock. It's
right.
What is it now? It's like AAA, like adult alternative album, or I don't even know what it is. I thought they call it AAA, but I'm so not a radio like business guy. I don't really know what the term is, but all the modern kind of, more songwriter / album oriented things, as opposed to, just trying to get a hit out onto the radio.
Right.
Right. Both of those are valid, but I like listening to all of those and then trying to pick up ways to play that fit the context of that song.
Right.
And just sit there and do that. Like I did that the other night. I was like playing along with like Ariana Grande or something like that.
Right. Right. And you learn things when you start to try to emulate like what the synth is doing or what the electronics are doing that are in place of the bass. You build new techniques off of that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything that you've tried to learn that you still haven't learned?
Yes.
We're not going to name them all. Like what's one notable song like that?
No, I always have, and it's just been on rotate. I think since day one is, Jocko's Teen Town.
Oh my gosh.
Which is probably on so many other bassist lists, but that is just like, it's just one that just, I'll never get there. And I'm comfortable with that now.
Right.
It's humbling. I think even when I feel like I've got it, I know that I don't. And there's a lot of songs out there that are they're masterpieces from a bass perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think of I can think of like several Tower of Power songs that are like that for me, where, Rocco is just such a machine. Rocco Prestia, right? The bass player in Tower of Power is just such a machine in the way he delivers, these 16th note grooves. It's very, very much from that like Jocko school, although I would say a very different kind of player in how he approaches it. And that stuff is always a challenge for me, and still working on it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's just these like little perfections in there that you're just chasing the dragon.
Yeah, absolutely. But the chase itself is worth it though, right?
That's why we're here.
Yeah. All right. Well, that sounds like a great place to end this episode. So we hope you guys have enjoyed our chat about learning songs. Once again, we really would look forward to your feedback and your input. Please stop by practicalbass.com, our website, and let us know what you think. Let us know if you've got ideas for future podcasts or anything else that you'd like us to know. We're eager to hear from you and eager to connect with you. And we hope that you'll also connect with us on some of the social sites where you can find us. You can find Practical Bass on Facebook, on Instagram, on Google+, and on Twitter. And I hope that we will hear from you soon. And until next week, I'm Paul Frields.
And I'm Dave Guzman.
And this has been Practical Bass.
Thanks for listening.
Later, we'll do that at some point during the show. I'll be like, I don't know, Dave. Let me Google that for you. And oh my gosh. Passive aggressive podcasting.